In the heart of rural Missouri, nestled among rolling hills and dense forests, lay the small town of Oak Ridge. With its quaint main street lined with mom-and-pop shops and a population that barely reached 4 digits, Oak Ridge was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. But for the past 7 years, the town had been home to a mystery that even the most gossipy locals couldn't fully unravel. At the edge of town, where the paved roads gave way to gravel and then to dirt, stood an old Victorian house that had seen better days. Its once pristine white paint was now peeling, revealing weathered wood underneath. The wraparound porch sagged slightly, and the garden had long since been reclaimed by nature. But it wasn't the state of the house that drew people's attention. It was its silent guardian, a golden retriever named Maximum. Max had appeared one foggy morning in late October, 7 years ago. The town had woken up to find him sitting on the porch of the old Peterson place, as still as a statue, his amber eyes fixed on the horizon. At first, folks thought he was just a stray that would move on in a day or two. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. Through scorching summers and bitter winters, Max remained at his post. The Peterson family had lived in that house for generations, but the last of them, old Mrs. Peterson, had passed away nearly a decade ago. The house had stood empty since then, a silent reminder of a family long gone. But with Max's arrival, it had taken on a new life, one of mystery and speculation. Sarah Thompson, the owner of the local diner, would often bring Max food and water. "That dog's got more loyalty than most people I know," she'd say, shaking her head in wonder. "Makes you wonder what he's waiting for." Theories about Max's origin and purpose abounded. Some said he was Mrs. Peterson's dog, returned home after being lost for years. Others whispered that he was a guardian spirit, protecting the house from vandals or squatters. The more practical-minded assumed he had simply been abandoned there and was too stubborn or too scared to leave. Whatever the truth, Max became a part of Oak Ridge's identity. Tourists passing through would often stop to take pictures of the faithful dog, and local children would pet him on their way to and from school. Despite all the attention, Max never left his post for more than a few minutes at a time, always returning to his vigil on the porch. Among those fascinated by Max was 10-year-old Emily Johnson. With her freckled face, wild curly hair, and an imagination that knew no bounds, Emily was drawn to the mystery surrounding the golden retriever. Every day after school, she would race to the old Peterson place, her backpack bouncing against her back, to spend time with Maximum. At first, Emily's parents, Tom and Lisa Johnson, had been wary of their daughter's newfound obsession. "You be careful around that dog, Emily," Tom had warned. "We don't know if he's dangerous." But Emily had simply rolled her eyes in that way only preteens can perfect. "Dad, Max wouldn't hurt a fly. He's the gentlest dog ever." And she was right. Despite his mysterious past, Max was nothing but gentle with Emily. He would wag his tail when he saw her coming, his whole body seeming to smile. Emily would sit on the porch steps, Max's head in her lap, and tell him about her day, her triumphs in math class, her struggles with the school bully, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. As the months passed, Emily's visits became a part of the town's routine. Folks would see her pedaling her blue bicycle down Main Street, her red hair streaming behind her, and know she was off to see Maximum. Some of the older residents would shake their heads, muttering about that girl and that dog, but most found it endearing. Emily's friendship with Max had another unexpected effect. It breathed new life into the old Peterson place. Where once the house had been avoided, now it became a gathering spot. Other children, curious about Emily's devotion to the dog, would sometimes join her. Soon, the overgrown front yard became an impromptu playground, filled with the sounds of laughter and barking. One crisp autumn day, as leaves in shades of red and gold drifted down around them, Emily made a discovery that would change everything. She had been absently running her hands along the porch railing when she felt something odd, a small lump under the peeling paint. Curious, she picked at it with her fingernail, and to her surprise, a small piece of the railing came loose, revealing a hidden compartment. Her heart pounding with excitement, Emily reached into the compartment and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. The cover was worn and faded, but she could just make out the words "Property of Margaret Peterson" embossed in gold. "Look, Max," she exclaimed, showing the book to the dog. "It's a diary. Do you think it belonged to old Mrs. Peterson? Max's tail thumped against the porch, his eyes seeming to sparkle with interest. Emily hesitated for a moment, her conscience warring with her curiosity. Was it right to read someone else's diary, even if they were long gone? But the mystery was too tempting to resist. With trembling fingers, she opened the diary. The pages were filled with neat, flowing handwriting, the ink slightly faded with age. Emily began to read, and as she did, the world around her seemed to fade away. She was transported back in time, seeing Oakridge through the eyes of Margaret Peterson. The diary told a tale of love, loss, and a secret that had been buried for decades. Margaret wrote of her husband, John, and their life in Oakridge. But there was something else, something that made Emily's eyes widen with each page she turned. Margaret spoke of a treasure, hidden somewhere on the property, waiting to be found by the right person. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the porch, Emily reluctantly closed the diary. Her mind was racing with questions. What was the treasure? Why had it been hidden? And most importantly, what did Max have to do with all of this? She looked at the golden retriever, who gazed back at her with those wise, amber eyes. You knew about this all along, didn't you, boy? She whispered, scratching behind his ears. Max's tail wagged in response, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that he understood far more than she had ever imagined. As she pedaled home that evening, the diary safely tucked in her backpack, Emily knew that her life, and the life of Oakridge, was about to change. The mystery of Max and the old Peterson place was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Little did Emily know that her discovery would set in motion a chain of events that would uncover long-buried secrets, test the bonds of friendship and family, and prove that sometimes, the greatest treasures are not gold or jewels, but the connections we make and the stories we share. As she disappeared around the corner, Max settled back into his spot on the porch. His vigil continued, but now there was a new spark in his eyes, a spark of hope that his long wait might finally be coming to an end. As autumn faded into winter, Emily's bond with Max grew stronger with each passing day. The old Peterson house became her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the pressures of school and the sometimes overwhelming energy of her loving but boisterous family. Every afternoon, rain or shine, she would make her way to the weathered porch, her backpack laden with homework, snacks, and of course, Margaret Peterson's mysterious diary. Max, ever faithful, would greet her with a gentle woof and a wagging tail. His golden fur, though slightly duller with age, still caught the sunlight in a way that made Emily think of warm summer days. She often wondered about his past, where he came from, who had loved him before, and what kept him tethered to this spot. But in the end, she was simply grateful for his unwavering companionship. You know, Max, Emily said one chilly afternoon, her breath forming little clouds in the air, I think you might be my best friend. She was nestled against his warm bulk, a tattered blanket wrapped around them both. Max responded by resting his head on her lap, his eyes gazing up at her with what she swore was understanding. As winter settled over Oakridge, blanketing the town in pristine white snow, Emily's visits became more challenging but no less frequent. She would trudge through the snow, her red boots leaving a trail of footprints from Main Street to the old house. The town buzzed with holiday preparations, strings of lights adorning the storefronts and the scent of cinnamon and pine wafting from every doorway. But for Emily, the real magic was in the quiet moments spent with Max, reading aloud from Margaret's diary. The diary itself was a window into another time. Margaret wrote of Oakridge in the 1960s, a town on the cusp of change. She described sock hops at the high school gymnasium, the installation of the town's first traffic light, and heated debates over whether to allow a McDonald's to open on the outskirts of town. But woven through these everyday observations were hints of something more, cryptic references to a family legacy and a responsibility that weighed heavily on Margaret's shoulders. As Emily read, she couldn't help but draw parallels between Margaret's life and her own. Both felt like outsiders in their own way, Margaret because of her family's secrets, and Emily because of her vivid imagination and insatiable curiosity. I think we would have been friends, Emily mused to Max one day. Margaret and me, I mean. And you too, of course, she added, giving the dog an affectionate pat. It was during one of these reading sessions, as a particularly fierce blizzard raged outside, that Emily made another startling discovery. She had been absent-mindedly running her fingers along the spine of the diary when she felt a slight ridge. Curious, she examined it more closely and realized that the leather binding was concealing a small, tightly folded piece of paper. With trembling fingers, she carefully extracted the paper and unfolded it. It was a map, hand-drawn and faded, but still legible. Emily's heart raced as she recognized landmarks around Oakridge, the town square, the old mill by the river, and there, unmistakably marked with an X, the Peterson house. "Max, look," she exclaimed, holding the map out for the dog to see. "It's a treasure map. Just like in the movies." Max's ears perked up, his tail thumping against the wooden porch in what Emily took as encouragement. The map seemed to confirm what Emily had begun to suspect from the diary entries. There was indeed something valuable hidden somewhere on the property. But what was it? And why had it been kept secret for so long? As winter slowly gave way to spring, Emily's quest to unravel the mystery deepened. She began to see the town with new eyes, wondering what secrets lay hidden behind the familiar facades of buildings she'd known all her life. The old Peterson house, once simply a curiosity, now seemed to pulse with untold stories. Emily's parents noticed the change in their daughter. Her tendency to daydream, always strong, now seemed to consume her. At the dinner table, she would often fall silent, her mind clearly elsewhere. Tom and Lisa exchanged worried glances, wondering if they should be concerned. "Emmy," her mother said gently one evening, using the pet name from Emily's childhood, "is everything okay? You seem distracted lately." Emily, startled out of her reverie, looked up from her half-eaten pot roast. "Oh, yeah, Mom. Everything's fine. Just thinking about a project for school." It wasn't exactly a lie. In her mind, unraveling the Peterson mystery was the most important project she'd ever undertaken. As the days grew longer and the first hints of green began to appear on the trees, Emily's investigations took on a new urgency. She began to spend her weekends exploring the town, the diary and map safely tucked into her backpack. Max, to everyone's surprise, began to accompany her on these excursions. It started one Saturday morning when Emily arrived at the house to find Max not in his usual spot on the porch, but waiting for her at the edge of the property, tail wagging expectantly. "You want to come with me, boy?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. In response, Max fell into step beside her, and together they set off into town. The sight of Emily walking down Main Street with the town's most famous canine resident caused quite a stir. Sarah Thompson nearly dropped a plate of pancakes when she saw them pass by the diner window. Old Mr. Jenkins, who was usually grumpy about everything, actually cracked a smile. And Mrs. Rodriguez, the town librarian, beamed at Emily and said, "Well, look at you two. Thick as thieves, I'd say." Emily couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. It was as if Max had finally deemed her worthy of being seen with him in public. Their weekend walks quickly became a new tradition, with Emily following the clues from the diary and map, and Max trotting faithfully by her side. They explored every nook and cranny of Oakridge. Emily pored over old newspapers in the library, much to Mrs. Rodriguez's delight. "It's so wonderful to see a young person interested in history," she said, helping Emily navigate the microfiche machine. They visited the old mill, now a museum, where Emily learned about the town's early days as a farming community. Max waited patiently outside, charming tourists with his dignified demeanor. As spring blossomed into summer, Emily's room began to resemble a detective's office. Her walls were covered with notes, printed articles, and hand-drawn timelines. She had even created a mystery board like the ones she'd seen on TV crime shows, with red string connecting various points of interest. Her parents, initially concerned about her obsession, gradually came to see it as a harmless hobby. "At least she's not glued to her phone like other kids her age," Tom remarked to Lisa one evening. Lisa nodded, but couldn't shake a nagging feeling that there was more to Emily's project than met the eye. What Emily's parents didn't know was that their daughter was grappling with a moral dilemma. The more she uncovered about the Peterson family and their secret, the more she realized that this wasn't just a game. The treasure, whatever it was, seemed to be something of real value, possibly even historical importance. Did she have the right to go looking for it? And if she found it, what should she do? These were the questions that plagued Emily as she sat with Max on the porch one warm June evening, the air heavy with the scent of blooming honeysuckle. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Emily absent-mindedly stroked Max's fur, her mind whirling with all she had discovered. "What do you think, Max?" she asked softly. "Should we keep going? Or are some secrets meant to stay buried?" Max looked up at her, his brown eyes wise and somehow reassuring. He gave a soft woof and nuzzled her hand. At that moment, Emily made a decision. She would see this through to the end, wherever it led. But she wouldn't do it alone. She had Max, of course, but she realized she might need human help as well. The question was, who could she trust with a secret this big? As if in answer to her unspoken question, she heard the crunch of gravel and looked up to see a familiar figure walking up the overgrown path to the house. It was her best friend from school, Tyler Martinez, his hands shoved in his pockets and a concerned look on his face. He called out tentatively. "Your mom said you might be here." I was worried about you. You've been so distant lately. Is everything okay?" Emily looked at Max, who gave her an encouraging tail wag, then back at Tyler. She took a deep breath. "Tyler," she said, "there's something I need to tell you. But you have to promise to keep it a secret. It's about this house, and Max, and, well, it's about a treasure." Tyler's eyes widened, a mix of confusion and excitement crossing his face. As Emily began to explain, she felt a weight lifting off her shoulders. Whatever came next, she wouldn't have to face it alone. She had Max, she had Tyler, and she had a mystery to solve. The summer stretched out before them, full of promise and adventure. Little did they know that their lives were about to change in ways they could never have imagined, as the secrets of the past collided with the realities of the present, all under the watchful gaze of a golden retriever who knew far more than he let on. The summer sun beat down on Oakridge, turning the sleepy town into a shimmering mirage of heat waves and lazy afternoons. For most kids, it was a time of freedom, days spent at the community pool, evenings catching fireflies in mason jars. But for Emily Johnson and her newfound partner in crime, Tyler Martinez, the summer of 2023 was shaping up to be the most exciting adventure of their young lives. The old Peterson house had become their unofficial headquarters. Emily had shared everything with Tyler, the diary, the map, and all her theories about the mysterious treasure. At first, Tyler had been skeptical. "Come on, he'd said, running a hand through his dark, curly hair. "This isn't some Hardy Boys novel. Real life doesn't have hidden treasures and century-old mysteries." But as Emily laid out all the evidence, Tyler's doubt gave way to curiosity, and finally, to full-blown enthusiasm. "Okay," he'd admitted, a grin spreading across his face. "This is pretty cool. Where do we start?" Their investigation began in earnest. Armed with Margaret Peterson's diary, the faded map, and a shared love of mystery novels, Emily and Tyler dove headfirst into Oakridge's history. They spent long days in the musty confines of the town library, poring over old newspapers and town records. Mrs. Rodriguez, delighted by their interest, became an unwitting ally, helping them navigate the library's archives and even turning a blind eye when their whispered discussions grew a bit too loud for library standards. Max, ever present, would wait patiently outside the library, his tail wagging whenever Emily and Tyler emerged, arms laden with photocopies and notebooks. "You know," Tyler said one day, scratching Max behind the ears, "I'm starting to think this dog might be the key to everything. It's like he's guarding more than just the house." Emily nodded, her freckled face serious. "I've been thinking the same thing. But how do we figure out what he knows?" Their breakthrough came on a sweltering July afternoon. They had been combing through the diary for the 100th time when Tyler noticed something odd. "Hey, he said, pointing to a particular entry. "Look at this. Margaret mentions a family heirloom here, but the ink looks different. Like it was added later." Emily leaned in, her eyes widening. "You're right. And look, there are tiny indentations on the page, like someone wrote something and then erased it." Excited by their discovery, they raced to the local craft store and bought a set of soft pencils. Back at the Peterson house, they carefully shaded over the page, holding their breath as faint words began to appear beneath Margaret's neat handwriting. "The key lies with the loyal guardian, Emily read aloud, her voice hushed with awe. "Tyler, do you think?" "Max," they said in unison, turning to look at the golden retriever who watched them with what seemed like amused interest. From that moment on, their focus shifted to Maximum. They examined his collar, his tags, even the spots where he liked to dig in the yard. But it was Emily who finally made the connection. "Wait a second," she said, flipping through the diary. "Margaret talks about her husband's pocket watch. She says it was always with their most loyal friend." Tyler's eyes lit up. "And in old photos, you always see those pocket watches on chains. What if?" Together, they approached Maximum. The old dog looked at them calmly, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. Gently, Emily ran her hands through the thick fur around his neck. Her fingers brushed against something hard and cold. "Tyler," she whispered, her heart pounding. "I think I found something." With trembling hands, they carefully worked the object free from Max's fur. It was a small, tarnished silver key, attached to a thin chain that had been carefully wound around a smaller collar hidden beneath Max's regular one. "Unbelievable," Tyler breathed. "He's been wearing it this whole time." The discovery of the key opened up a whole new avenue of investigation. But it also raised more questions. What did the key open? And how had Max ended up with it? Their search took on a new urgency. They scoured the Peterson house, looking for any lock that the key might fit. They searched floorboards, examined the backs of old paintings, and even climbed up to the dusty attic, much to the dismay of Emily's parents when they returned home covered in cobwebs. "Emmy," her mother said one evening, concern etching her features. "Don't you think you and Tyler are taking this game a bit too far? It's summer. You should be out having fun, not cooped up in that old house." Emily squirmed, torn between her promise to keep the secret and her discomfort with misleading her parents. "It's not just a game, Mom," she said finally. We're doing a history project. About Oakridge. It's important." Lisa Johnson raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. She shared a look with her husband, both of them silently agreeing to keep a closer eye on their daughter's summer activities. As July melted into August, Emily and Tyler's investigation hit a wall. They had searched every inch of the Peterson property and come up empty. The key remained a mystery, its purpose tantalizingly out of reach. It was Max who inadvertently provided the next clue. On a particularly hot afternoon, the old dog led them on a meandering walk that took them to the outskirts of town, near the old railroad tracks. As Emily and Tyler rested in the shade of a large oak tree, Max began to dig furiously at its base. "Max, stop that," Emily said, moving to pull him away. But as she did, she noticed something glinting in the dirt. Brushing away the soil, she uncovered a small metal plaque embedded in the ground. The inscription read, "Peterson Mill Estate 1885. Tyler's eyes widened. Wasn't there something in the diary about the Petersons owning a mill? They raced back to the house, Max trotting behind them with what looked suspiciously like a doggy grin. Flipping through the diary, they found the entry they were looking for. Margaret had written about her grandfather's mill, which had been the cornerstone of the family's fortune. But more importantly, she mentioned a hidden safe where the family kept its most precious possessions. "The mill," Emily said, her eyes shining with excitement. "That's got to be where the key leads." But their elation was short-lived. The old Peterson mill had been torn down decades ago, replaced by a nondescript office building. How could they search for a hidden safe in a place that no longer existed? It was at this moment of despair that fate intervened in the form of old Mr. Jenkins, Oakridge's resident grump and, as it turned out, a former employee of the Peterson mill. He had been watching Emily and Tyler's frequent trips around town with growing curiosity, and one day, he called them over as they passed his porch. "You kids sure are interested in that old Peterson place," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Might be I know a thing or two that could help you out." Emily and Tyler exchanged glances. Should they trust him with their secret? But something in Mr. Jenkins' eyes, a spark of mischief, perhaps, or shared curiosity, made the decision for them. Over glasses of lemonade that were more tart than sweet, Mr. Jenkins told them about his days working at the mill. He spoke of hidden passages, of whispered secrets, and of the day the mill closed down. They never did tear down the whole thing, You know, he said, leaning in conspiratorially. The basement's still there, under that new building. Sealed up tight, but it's there. Armed with this new information, Emily and Tyler faced a daunting challenge. How could they gain access to a sealed basement under a busy office building? It seemed impossible, perhaps even illegal. They were, after all, just kids. As they sat on the Peterson house porch that evening, the weight of their discovery heavy on their shoulders, Emily realized that they couldn't do this alone. They needed help, adult help. Tyler, she said slowly, I think it's time we told my parents. Tyler nodded, relief evident on his face. Yeah, I think you're right. This is bigger than us now. As the sun set over Oakridge, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Emily and Tyler made their way to the Johnson house, Max padding along beside them. They carried with them Margaret's diary, the mysterious key, and a story so incredible it seemed almost unbelievable. Little did they know that their decision to involve Emily's parents would set in motion a chain of events that would not only unravel the Peterson mystery but also change the face of Oakridge forever. As they stepped onto the front porch of Emily's house, hearts pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, they were about to cross a threshold from which there was no turning back. The summer adventure that had begun with a girl and a dog was about to become a town-wide expedition into the past, unearthing secrets that had lain dormant for generations. And at the center of it all was Max, the loyal guardian whose unwavering vigil had preserved a legacy waiting to be discovered. The Johnson family kitchen had never been so quiet. Tom and Lisa sat at the table, their faces a mixture of disbelief and concern as they listened to Emily and Tyler recount their summer adventure. The diary lay open between them, the mysterious key glinting under the warm light of the overhead lamp. Max, ever present, sat quietly by Emily's feet, his eyes moving from person to person as if following the conversation. Let me get this straight, Tom said, running a hand through his graying hair. You two have been investigating a decades-old mystery involving a hidden treasure, a secret diary, and a dog who's been guarding it all? His voice held a note of skepticism, but there was also a glimmer of intrigue in his eyes. Emily nodded earnestly. I know it sounds crazy, Dad, but it's all true. We can prove it. Lisa leaned forward, her brow furrowed. Emmy, honey, while I'm impressed by your dedication and resourcefulness, I'm not sure it's appropriate for you to be digging into other people's family histories like this. The Petersons may have had reasons for keeping their secrets. Tyler, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. But Mrs. Johnson, what if it's something important? Something that could help people? A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. The adults exchanged glances, weighing the situation. Finally, Tom let out a long sigh. All right, let's say we believe you. What exactly do you want us to do? Emily's face lit up. We need to get into the basement of the old mill site. Mr. Jenkins said it's still there, under the new office building. We think that's where the treasure is hidden. Tom's eyebrows shot up. Whoa, hold on there, kiddo. We can't just break into a building. That's illegal, not to mention dangerous. But Dad, Emily protested, we have to dash. She was cut off by the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside. Max's ears perked up, and he let out a soft woof. All heads turned towards the window, where headlights illuminated the driveway. Are we expecting someone? Lisa asked, moving to peer out the window. Her gasp drew everyone's attention. There's a car I don't recognize, and a moving truck behind it. The Johnsons, along with Tyler and Max, spilled out onto the front porch. In the glow of the porch light, they watched as two figures emerged from the car, a woman in her early 40s and a teenage girl. The woman looked around, her gaze settling on the group on the porch. Her eyes widened in recognition. Oh my goodness, she said, her voice carrying in the quiet evening air. You must be the Johnsons. I'm Sarah Peterson, and this is my daughter, Rachel. We're moving back to Oakridge. For a moment, no one moved. Then Max, with a joyful bark that seemed to break the spell of silence, bounded down the porch steps and ran to Sarah. His tail wagged furiously as he circled her, whining with excitement. Sarah knelt down, tears forming in her eyes as she embraced the golden retriever. Max, she whispered, burying her face in his fur. Oh, Max, you wonderful boy. You've been here all along, haven't you? The scene unfolding before them was almost too much to process. Emily and Tyler exchanged wide-eyed glances, their minds racing. The Petersons were back. How was this possible? Tom was the first to recover. He stepped forward, extending a hand. "Welcome back to Oakridge, Sarah. I'm Tom Johnson, and this is my wife Lisa, our daughter Emily, and her friend Tyler." "That's quite a welcome Max is giving you." Sarah stood, wiping her eyes. "Thank you, Tom. It's been a long time coming. We've been away for far too long." As the adults made introductions, Emily couldn't contain herself any longer. "Are you related to Margaret Peterson?" she blurted out. Sarah's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Why, yes. Margaret was my grandmother." "How did you?" Her gaze fell on the diary in Emily's hands, and her breath caught. Is that my grandmother's diary?" The next hour was a whirlwind of explanations and revelations. The Johnsons invited the Petersons in, and over hastily made coffee and leftover apple pie, Sarah filled in the gaps of the story that Emily and Tyler had been trying to piece together all summer. The Peterson family, Sarah explained, had been the victims of a sophisticated blackmail scheme. Years ago, her father, Robert Peterson, had uncovered evidence of corruption involving several high-ranking state officials. But before he could go public with the information, the corrupt officials had turned the tables on him, threatening to frame him for crimes he didn't commit. "Dad had no choice," Sarah said, her voice tight with old pain. "He had to protect the family. So we left, in the middle of the night. We've been living under assumed names ever since, always looking over our shoulders." Rachel, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "But now the truth's finally come out. Those officials have been arrested. We can come home." Emily and Tyler listened in awe, their minds racing to connect this new information with everything they had discovered. "But what about the treasure?" Tyler asked. "And the key we found with Max?" Sarah smiled, a mix of sadness and pride in her eyes. "Ah, the treasure. It's not gold or jewels, if that's what you were thinking. It's information, documents, recordings, all the evidence my father gathered. He hid it before we left, knowing it might be needed someday." "And Max?" Emily asked, reaching out to stroke the dog's head. "How did he end up here?" "Max was just a puppy when we left," Sarah explained. "We couldn't take him with us, it was too dangerous. So Dad brought him here, to the old house. He must have known that Max would guard the place, keep the secret safe until we could return." Her voice broke slightly. "I can't believe he stayed all these years." As the night wore on, a plan began to form. With the Peterson family back and the threat gone, they could now safely retrieve the hidden evidence. Tom, his initial skepticism replaced by determination, offered to help navigate the legal aspects of accessing the old mill basement. "I've got some contacts in the city planning office," he said. "We'll do this by the book, get all the proper permissions. Might take a little time, but we'll get there." As the clock struck midnight, the impromptu gathering began to break up. The Petersons would stay with the Johnsons until they could move back into their old home. As everyone said their goodnights, Emily found herself standing next to Rachel Peterson. "So," Rachel said, a hint of a smile on her face, "I hear you've been playing detective in my family's house all summer." Emily blushed, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "I'm sorry if we intruded. We wanted to help Maximum. And solve the mystery." Rachel's smile widened. "Are you kidding? It's amazing what you did. I think you might have saved my family's legacy. Thank you." As Emily drifted off to sleep that night, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The mystery that had consumed her summer was unraveling in ways she could never have imagined. But even as one set of questions was answered, new ones arose. What would happen when they finally accessed the hidden evidence? How would Oakridge change with the return of the Peterson family? And what about Max? The loyal guardian had fulfilled his mission, but what role would he play now? As the first light of dawn began to creep over Oakridge, Emily knew one thing for certain: this was far from the end of the story. In fact, it felt like a whole new chapter was just beginning, not just for her, but for the entire town. Little did she know that the events set in motion that night would lead to revelations that would shake Oakridge to its very foundations, uncovering long-buried secrets and testing the bonds of friendship, family, and community in ways no one could have foreseen. The last days of summer in Oakridge were like no other in living memory. The return of the Peterson family had sent ripples through the community, stirring up a mix of curiosity, excitement, and in some corners, unease. The town buzzed with whispered conversations and speculative glances, as everyone tried to piece together the story that had brought the prodigal family home. For Emily and Tyler, the days passed in a whirlwind of activity. They had become unofficial liaisons between the Petersons and the rest of the town, fielding questions and helping to smooth over the inevitable awkwardness that came with such a dramatic return. Rachel Peterson had quickly become a part of their duo, turning it into a trio. Her insider knowledge of her family's history, combined with Emily and Tyler's summer of investigation, made them a formidable team. Tom Johnson had been true to his word, working tirelessly to secure the necessary permissions to access the old mill basement. It was a process fraught with red tape and unexpected obstacles, but Tom's determination never wavered. "We're going to do this right," he'd say whenever frustration threatened to overtake them. "No shortcuts, no sneaking around. We'll bring the truth to light, fair and square." As August drew to a close, their efforts finally paid off. The city council, after much deliberation, granted them a special permit to excavate the sealed basement. The date was set for the Saturday before Labor Day, giving the town one last hurrah before the start of the new school year. The morning of the excavation dawned clear and bright, with just a hint of autumn crispness in the air. It seemed all of Oakridge had turned out for the event. The parking lot of the office building that now stood on the old mill site was packed with cars, and a crowd had gathered behind the yellow caution tape that cordoned off the excavation area. Emily, Tyler, and Rachel stood at the front of the crowd, Max sitting alertly at their feet. Sarah and Robert Peterson stood nearby, their faces a mix of anticipation and apprehension. This was the moment they had both longed for and dreaded for years. As the excavation team prepared their equipment, a hush fell over the crowd. The heavy machinery roared to life, and the first chunks of concrete were lifted away. Hours passed, the sun climbing high in the sky as the work continued. The crowd's excitement began to wane as the morning stretched into afternoon with no sign of a breakthrough. Just as people were beginning to whisper about giving up, there was a shout from one of the workers. "We've found something." The crowd surged forward, held back only by the efforts of the local police force. Emily, Tyler, and Rachel exchanged excited glances. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for all summer. As the dust settled, a metal door was revealed, set into the concrete foundation. It looked old, its surface pitted and rusted, but it had clearly been built to last. And there, in the center of the door, was a small, tarnished keyhole. All eyes turned to Sarah Peterson. With trembling hands, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the key that Max had guarded for so long. The crowd held its breath as she approached the door, inserted the key, and turned it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, the door swung open. What happened next would be talked about in Oakridge for generations to come. From the depths of the hidden room came a flood of papers, photographs, and old reel-to-reel tapes. Robert Peterson, with tears in his eyes, began to sort through the material, explaining its significance to the wide-eyed onlookers. "This is it," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "All the evidence we gathered. Proof of corruption, bribery, misuse of public funds, it's all here." As the implications of the discovery began to sink in, a commotion arose at the edge of the crowd. Sheriff Anderson was making his way through, a grim expression on his face. Behind him were several men in suits, their faces set in hard lines. "Robert Peterson," the sheriff called out, his voice carrying over the murmur of the crowd. "These gentlemen are from the State Bureau of Investigation. They'd like to have a word with you." A tense silence fell over the gathering. Emily felt her heart racing. Was this it? Had they come this far only to see Mr. Peterson arrested? But then one of the suited men stepped forward, his expression softening. "Mr. Peterson," he said, "we're not here to arrest you. We're here because of an anonymous tip we received last week, detailing much of what you've uncovered here. We've been working round the clock to verify the information, and, well, sir, You've blown the lid off one of the biggest corruption scandals in state history." A collective gasp went up from the crowd, followed by an eruption of cheers and applause. Robert Peterson sagged with relief, caught and supported by his wife and daughter. Emily, Tyler, and Rachel hugged each other, jumping up and down with excitement. Max barked joyfully, caught up in the infectious enthusiasm of the moment. As the initial excitement began to die down, the real work began. The SBI agents carefully catalogued and collected the evidence, promising a full investigation. Reporters who had gathered to cover the unusual excavation now found themselves with a much bigger story on their hands. Phones were out everywhere as people spread the news far beyond the borders of Oakridge. Amid the chaos, Emily found herself standing next to Sarah Peterson. The older woman placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You know," she said softly, "none of this would have happened without you. Your curiosity, your determination, you've helped right a wrong that's been festering for decades." Emily blushed, feeling a mixture of pride and embarrassment. "I just wanted to help Max," she said. "And solve the mystery." Sarah smiled. "Sometimes the smallest actions can lead to the biggest changes. You've taught us all a valuable lesson about perseverance and justice." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the excavation site, the crowd finally began to disperse. The evidence was secured, statements had been taken, and plans were made for further investigation. But for the residents of Oakridge, this was more than just the resolution of a long-buried scandal. It was the dawn of a new era for their town. In the days that followed, Oakridge found itself at the center of a media storm. Reporters from national networks descended on the town, eager to tell the story of the long-lost evidence, the faithful dog, and the young girl whose curiosity had set it all in motion. For Emily, Tyler, and Rachel, the aftermath of their adventure was both exhilarating and overwhelming. They were hailed as local heroes, their names mentioned alongside those of the Peterson family in news reports and interviews. It was a lot for three kids to handle, but they found strength in their friendship and the support of their families. As the new school year began, life in Oakridge slowly started to return to normal, or at least, a new version of normal. The Peterson house was being renovated, its years of neglect finally being addressed. Max, no longer bound by his vigil, split his time between the Peterson and Johnson homes, much to everyone's delight. The story of the Peterson family and the corruption they had uncovered sparked a renewed interest in civic engagement among the townspeople. Town council meetings, once sparsely attended, were now packed as citizens took a more active role in local governance. But for Emily, the greatest change was internal. The events of the summer had shown her the power of curiosity, perseverance, and standing up for what's right. As she sat on the front porch of her house one evening, Max's head resting on her lap, she reflected on all that had happened. The mystery was solved, the truth was out, and justice was being served. But Emily knew that this wasn't the end of her adventures. It was just the beginning. With Max by her side and her friends at her back, she was ready for whatever mysteries the future might hold. As the first stars began to twinkle in the twilight sky, Emily scratched Max behind the ears and smiled. In Oakridge, where a girl's curiosity and a dog's loyalty had changed everything, anything seemed possible. As the crisp autumn air settled over Oakridge, the town found itself in a state of transformation. The events of the summer had left an indelible mark on the community, reshaping its identity and setting it on a new course. For Emily Johnson, now entering her final year of middle school, the changes were both exciting and a little overwhelming. The Peterson house, once a decaying reminder of the past, now stood proudly restored. Its fresh coat of paint and manicured lawn made it the jewel of the neighborhood. Sarah and Robert Peterson had thrown themselves into community life with gusto, making up for lost time. Robert, cleared of all suspicions and hailed as a whistleblower, had been appointed to a state commission on government ethics. Sarah, drawing on her years of living under assumed identities, had started a support group for families dealing with trauma and displacement. Emily, Tyler, and Rachel had become local celebrities of sorts. Their role in uncovering the scandal had made them minor stars in Oakridge, a status that was both thrilling and uncomfortable. They found themselves invited to speak at school assemblies and community events, sharing their story and the lessons they had learned about perseverance and civic responsibility. "I never thought I'd say this," Tyler confided to Emily one day as they walked home from school, "but I'm kind of looking forward to the day when we're old news." Emily nodded in agreement. "I know what you mean. It's weird having everyone know who we are. But you have to admit, it's pretty cool being able to make a difference." As they rounded the corner onto Emily's street, they saw a familiar golden shape bounding towards them. Max, his coat gleaming in the afternoon sun, greeted them with enthusiastic barks and wagging tail. The old dog had found a new lease on life, splitting his time between the Peterson and Johnson households and soaking up attention from everyone in town. "Hey, Max," Emily laughed, kneeling to ruffle his fur. "What have you been up to today, boy?" Max's only response was to drop a slightly soggy tennis ball at their feet, his eyes bright with the eternal hope of all dogs that the game of fetch might continue indefinitely. As they played with Max in the front yard, Emily's mom came out onto the porch. "Emmy," she called, "don't forget we have that meeting at the community center tonight. The new youth council, remember?" Emily groaned inwardly. In the wake of the summer's events, the town had decided to form a youth council to give younger residents a voice in community affairs. Emily, Tyler, and Rachel had been asked to be founding members. It was an honor, but it also meant a lot of responsibility. "We'll be there, Mrs. Johnson," Tyler assured her. "We're just going to finish up with Max and then head over." The community center was buzzing with activity when they arrived. The main hall had been set up for the youth council meeting, with chairs arranged in a circle and a whiteboard at the front. Emily was surprised to see how many kids had shown up. It wasn't just the usual overachievers and student government types. There were kids from all walks of life, all grades, all brought together by a newfound interest in their town's future. As the meeting got underway, Emily found herself swept up in the energy of the room. Ideas flew back and forth, proposals for new youth programs, suggestions for community service projects, plans for making Oakridge more environmentally friendly. It was exciting to see how many of her peers cared about making their town a better place. "What if we started a town history project?" Rachel suggested during a brainstorming session. "We could interview older residents, collect stories and photographs. It would help preserve Oakridge's heritage and maybe uncover more hidden stories." The idea was met with enthusiasm, and soon a committee was formed to start planning the project. Emily volunteered to help, her mind already racing with possibilities. She thought of old Mr. Jenkins and his stories about the mill. How many other untold tales were out there, waiting to be discovered? As the meeting wound down, Mayor Thompson, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, stood up to address the group. "I just want to say how proud I am of all of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What happened this summer showed us the importance of engaged citizens, of people willing to ask questions and seek the truth. You young people are the future of Oakridge, and based on what I've seen tonight, I'd say our future is in very good hands." Walking home under a canopy of stars, Emily felt a sense of purpose she'd never experienced before. The mystery of the Peterson house had been solved, but in many ways, it felt like her real work was just beginning. As the months passed, Oakridge continued to evolve. The corruption scandal had led to a series of reforms at the state level, with Oakridge often cited as an example of grassroots civic engagement. Tourists began to trickle in, drawn by the story of the long-buried secret and the faithful dog who had guarded it. The town embraced its new identity. The old mill site, once an anonymous office building, was transformed into a museum dedicated to Oakridge's history and the importance of civic responsibility. Max, much to his bewilderment, found himself immortalized in a bronze statue in the town square, forever watching over the community he had served so faithfully. For Emily, life settled into a new rhythm. School, youth council meetings, working on the town history project, and of course, plenty of time with Maximum. She still visited the Peterson house regularly, but now it was filled with life and laughter rather than mystery and silence. One crisp Saturday morning in late fall, Emily sat on the porch of the Peterson house, Max's head in her lap, as she interviewed Sarah for the history project. As Sarah recounted the events that had led to their family's exile and eventual return, Emily was struck by how much had changed in just a few short months. "You know," Sarah said, pausing in her narrative, I used to think that coming back to Oakridge would be the end of our story. That once the truth was out, we could just pick up where we left off. But I'm realizing now that it's not an ending at all. It's a new beginning, for all of us. Emily nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. It's like that quote we learned in English class, she said. The end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Sarah smiled, impressed. T.S. Eliot. Very apt, Emily. Yes, that's exactly it. We're seeing Oakridge, and ourselves, in a whole new light. As the interview wrapped up, Emily's thoughts turned to the future. Middle school wouldn't last forever, and beyond that lay high school, college, and a world of possibilities. Would she stay in Oakridge? Go off to the big city? Become an investigative journalist? A historian? A detective? For now, those questions could wait. She had a town history project to work on, a youth council to contribute to, and a very insistent dog who was clearly of the opinion that it was time for his walk. As Emily clipped Max's leash to his collar and set off down the street, she felt a sense of contentment wash over her. The mystery that had consumed her summer had led to so much more than she could have ever imagined. It had changed her town, her friends, her family, and herself. Whatever the future held, Emily knew one thing for certain: life in Oakridge would never be boring. There would always be stories to uncover, truths to seek, and ways to make a difference. And with friends like Tyler and Rachel by her side, and Max's unwavering companionship, she was ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. As they rounded the corner towards the town square, Emily caught sight of Max's statue, standing proud in the autumn sunlight. She smiled, giving the real Max an affectionate pat. In Oakridge, where a girl's curiosity and a dog's loyalty had changed everything, the greatest adventures were still to come. The end of summer had brought the close of one chapter, but for Emily, for Max, for the Petersons, and for all of Oakridge, it was indeed a new beginning. And as the town settled into its new identity, embracing its past while looking to the future, there was a sense that the best was yet to come.